Chapter 7. The legend of the red-eyed monster bass didn't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's not like other stories. For starters, no one really knows where it came from. It just sort of started popping up. Sure, there are theories about its origin, but nothing for sure, and there's no way to prove it. It's a mutant cross between a bear and a rock bass. That particular kind of fish has red eyes, but they only get about as big as your hand, and this creature was way bigger than that. Some people say it's prehistoric, a leftover from the Ice Age when the giant glaciers rolled over the land and made the lakes that dot the northern end of the state. Those people say it was frozen in ice and deposited deep in the mud at the bottom of the lake. Over centuries, the ice melted until it was revived and dug its way up through the mud to survive in modern times. Other people think it was an experiment that went bad. In those versions, it was a scientist from the university who was trying to create a superfish that could feed big populations. The thing got out of control and he didn't have the heart to put it down, so he drove north and deposited it into a small lake, hoping no one would ever notice. A few people think that the fish is the result of a curse put on the lake by the Ojibwa medicine man that didn't like people hunting or fishing for sport instead of food. It's not the most popular origin story, but it's as good as any other if you think about it. So the story doesn't really have a beginning, just moments, glimpses, and legends that resonate through time and go back almost a century. The first sighting happened back in the 1920s during a water skiing show that was held on the lake as part of a promotional effort to get people from the southern cities to buy land for vacation cottages. A water skiing show? Dylan couldn't imagine such a thing being entertaining. Absolutely, Grandpa said. Back then, people would come from counties all over the state for stranger things than that. Lumberjacking competitions, pie eating contests. They didn't have your electronics, your tablets and iPods. They didn't have TV, and radio was still pretty early on. Dylan tried to imagine a world without electronics and got bored just trying to imagine it. Anyway, the star act of the show was Catherine Holly, a young woman who left home at 12 to join the circus, where she worked as an acrobat until she decided to join the Barnstormers as a wing walker. Grandpa continued his tale. Catherine Holly went by the stage name Mad Cat, a name she earned for her reputation of being braver than any three men put together. She never met a challenge she couldn't win over. And while she was barnstorming in upstate New York, she met a man who challenged her skill walking wings to walk on water. She couldn't resist, even though she'd never been in a boat before, let alone been dragged behind one while strapped to a pair of skis. She took to it quickly, and before anyone knew it, she'd become even more famous for her trick skiing than she had been for her wing walking or circus work. There were billboards of her all along Route 66, and the flyers posted from New York to Los Angeles. Getting her up here to this small lake in the woods must have cost a fortune those developers must have been willing to part with, either because they thought it would make their money back or because they were worried that they wouldn't. The show was promoted everywhere, from as far away as Chicago, Cleveland, and Buffalo. People came from 4 states and parts of Canada, and on the day of the show, lined the edges of the lake elbow to elbow and 10 people deep. They all packed in to see the spectacle they had heard about but never seen, and the land developers who put on the show were happy beyond their wildest dreams. All these people, all these customers, all this money. The crowd erupted into applause when a throaty engine fired up from the far end of the lake, its rasping gurgle echoing off the trees and hills that surrounded. Within moments, the wood boat with the big engine and gleaming glass was crossing the lake like a rocket, towing a dozen men and women on skis, who zoomed in and out and in, doing tricks and waving to the crowd. On one pass, they stood on each other's shoulders to form a human pyramid. On another, half skied forward while the other skied backwards. The show went on like this for more than an hour, and the crowd was delighted, but eventually grew restless. They loved the spectacle, but had gathered for one reason, and eventually began to chant their desire in unison. Mad Cat! Mad Cat! Over and over again they chanted until an announcer, his voice coming from loudspeakers that were positioned all around the lake, satisfied the gathering people. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, you've seen the warm-up, but are you ready for the main event? The crowd again went wild. Then here she is, the winged walker of water, the aquabat, the stupendous star of skiing, Mad Cat Holly! With that, the boat engine again roared to life, and Catherine Holly, who'd been hidden away in a small cove, gave the nod to her personal boat captain, an old man named Rocky, who she'd met during her barnstorming days. Rocky shoved the throttle handle forward, and the boat leapt from the cove, dragging Cat 80 feet behind on the end of a rope. The first trick was a walk in the park for an expert like her. Rocky would climb to max speed and turn the boat suddenly to the left in a tight circle that would create a spiral of waves. Cat would hit the waves, using them like a jump, and sail into the air, doing a somersault and landing just as Rocky straightened out the boat and sped off across the lake. Just as scripted, Mad Cat hit the wave and flew into the air, and as she straightens her somersault, she flashed a broad smile to the spectators, who sent those who saw it into a frenzy. More tricks, more acrobats. Mad Cat's routine went on like that for 20 minutes, and she maintained poise and command the entire time. For the next section of the routine, a ramp was dragged by a small boat into the center of the lake, and Rocky made several passes of it, each time launching Mad Cat more than 50 feet into the air, and she would perform her flips and spins, her twists and turns perfectly. The crowd went wild every single time. What does this have to do with a giant fish? Dylan interrupted his grandpa's story. I'm getting to that, his grandpa said. Just be patient. For the big finale of the show, Mad Cat and Rocky had planned to pull out all the stops. Rocky was supposed to approach the ramp at full speed, launching Mad Cat more than 70 feet into the air and covering more than a football field of distance. Just as she left the ramp, small explosive charges were set to blow, making it look like she had been blown across the lake by a massive explosion. It was thrilling, and the two had performed the same trick more than a dozen times. The Mad Cat Super Explosion Finale, that's what they called it, and it was a trick that had brought people from far and wide to the lake. They just had to see it. Everything was going fine at first. Rocky went to the far end of the lake to get up a full head of steam and maximum speed before Mad Cat hit the ramp. He once again shoved the accelerator handle all the way forward, jerking his toe ahead with sheer power of the boat's engine. But something happened. Rocky, his craft rocketing across the lake seconds from the big finale, felt a shooting pain down his old left arm, a sure warning sign of a heart attack. Before he could do anything about it, he lost consciousness. Some say he was dead before the boat hit the ramp. Others say it was the collision of the craft with the explosive-laden ramp that led to his demise. Either way, Mad Cat Holly was in deep trouble. The boat hit the ramp and everything exploded in a massive column of fire and smoke. She was going too fast to be able to stop and thought she better let go, and quickly, if she was going to avoid the same fate as her trusted driver. She let go of the rope and tried to fall backward but couldn't. She was going too fast. 1 second, 2 seconds went by. By the time she would have been able to count to 3, it would have been too late. That's when it happened. Later, she told reporters that something pushed her out of the way. She hadn't fallen. She hadn't been knocked back by the explosion. She had been pushed by something below the surface and swore it was a fish. Before she realized what had happened, she'd been thrown free of the explosion, of her skis, and was suddenly, inexplicably, surrounded by quiet and water. So she fell over and went under? That's not a mystery, said Dylan. That's gravity. Well, maybe, said his grandpa. And if it had been all it had been, the story might have ended there. But Mad Cat Holly swore there was more. She came to the surface amid shrieks of the crowd, the heat from the fire and the confusion of the rescue boats coming her way with buckets to douse the blaze. She took a big breath and then looked down, and that's when she saw it, the shadowy form of a giant fish with an unblinking and massive red eye that looked at her for a long moment, turned and swam away without so much as a splash. Mad Cat Holly told her story to anyone who would listen, reporters, spectators, the police. She told them about the massive fish that had saved her life. She swore to them it was true, about its size, about it pushing her from harm's way, about the giant red eye, but no one would ever believe her. The lake was too small. It sounded like a whale. There was no such thing as monsters. But Mad Cat remained true to her story. She remained convinced she had been saved by a giant fish. So convinced, she never again went back in the water, never again strapped on a pair of skis. And once word got out about her outlandish tale, people started to wonder if she had killed Rocky, or if she had simply gone insane. Still, she swore her experience was real. She swore it during the police investigation. She swore it at Rocky's funeral. She swore it for years after she had been carted away to an insane asylum. Mad Cat Holly, who everyone started calling Crazy Cat Holly, swore her story about the red-eyed monster fish was real right up until the day she died. Dylan, of course, didn't buy any of it. It was too far-fetched, too outlandish. His grandpa had no proof. It was almost as if his grandfather could sense what he was thinking, because just at that moment the old man reached into his wallet and pulled out a tattered newspaper clipping that had been laminated years before and yellowed with age. He unfolded it and handed it to Dylan, still sitting on the log near the water. The headline read, "Mad Cat Holly saved from fiery death. Claims it was a fish." And below were two photos. The first picture of the burning ramp and boat. The second was a picture of Mad Cat herself, floating in the water, staring down like there was something below the surface she couldn't take her eyes off of. This might require further investigation, Dylan thought. Maybe there was something to this fish story after all. But he doubted it. In fact, he knew it couldn't be true. But he didn't know how wrong he could be.